Hello and welcome to week 6 of How to Teach at Buddha Dharma University. And this week we are talking about don't get attached. So before we begin the actual lesson itself, as always, we're going to have our activating strategy to start us off. So as you've done in the past, once the questions pop up, you can pause the video to work out your responses, write them out or type them out, and then when you're ready, click play again and we'll proceed. So for those of you who have led a group, a learning group in the past, whether it's guided meditation or book study, what have you, has there ever been a moment for you where you stop and you realize, dang, they're not getting it, whatever it might be. I'm not getting my ideas across. We're not understanding what I'm saying. What did you do when you realized that this was taking place? Okay, so take a moment and think about that. Now, if you haven't been in a situation where you have had the opportunity to present material to a group of learners, think of a time when you were on the receiving end of such a lesson and that you might have found the information confusing or you didn't understand it in some way. What do you believe the issue was? Did your instructor or group leader realize what was happening? And how did you handle it? How about the instructor? If they realized what was going on, what did they do? And when you brought it to their attention, if you did, how did they handle that? And how did you feel about the way it was handled? So pause the video here, work out your responses, and we will move on. So we'll take a look at what a flop is. So lessons flop when we have trouble getting our ideas across. And this can be a super frustrating thing to have happen because we do spend a lot of time preparing our lessons and the activities that go with them. So it can be a very difficult thing. And you saw from the lesson plans that I showed you that we really do go through a process of really carefully considering what we're going to include, the materials that we present, how we present, and the types of questions we're going to ask, etc. So there's a lot of time that goes into this. So a flop really it's really not a lack of effort on the part of the instructor. In general, a flop is simply a lesson that did not end up helping students the way we thought they were going to. It didn't help students meet their learning objectives. And flops are identified at different points during the lesson. It can happen at any time. So it can happen right in the middle of a lesson, during a lesson. So it can happen when you're checking in for understanding, and then the student responses that are coming up to you really just show that, ooh, no, I missed the mark. I didn't get the idea across to them well. It can also happen after a lesson, at the end, during debriefing discussions, as in whole group discussions, or during a time when students have the opportunity to reflect on what it is that they learned. It's clear, according to their responses, that they did not understand the material that was presented. So one of the things I do want to acknowledge here regarding the article that you read on flops is that the intended audience is for public school teachers, and the students that we're talking about in this article, it seems to be geared towards younger children, and we are of course working with adults, so some of the coping strategies that are mentioned in the article are not necessarily appropriate for our audience as priests. So that said, I presented that article because the types of flops that are mentioned in there are still good identifying factors, and they're accurate. So the most important message, the most important takeaway of this article is the advice to let it all go. Don't get really attached to the outcome. Don't get hung up on the amount of time that you spent on preparing that lesson. Don't beat yourself up. It happens to seasoned professionals, educators who have been teaching for decades. It happens. So let it go. It's okay. We can move on. So be okay with it. It's important to let go, like I said, of our expectations. Sometimes our egos get wrapped up into that. Sometimes we have to admit that a lesson may not have been planned out as well as we thought, or just what we thought just simply didn't connect, and it happens. The Buddha teaches often on the unhelpfulness of clinging to an outcome or an expectation, and this is a great time to remember that teaching. So whether we're talking about life in general or when we are leading a learning group, so it's all good, just let it go. It will be okay, because there are ways to handle a flop. So the article talks about, okay, if you notice that you have flopped in the middle of this lesson, play games, distract them. This works great for 6-year-olds, which is, who this the author of the article seems to work with. But for our purposes, we're not going to play games. I mean, maybe you will, if you want to, that's fine. But with adult learners, it's okay to say, hey, let's revisit this next session. Okay. And in the meantime, as you're kind of regrouping, you can collect questions. So you've noticed that your students are not understanding what's going on. So you can have them write down on a piece of paper questions about what it was that you were talking about. And this might give you some insight to where you missed the mark or where they missed the mark. And it will help you in formulating a backup plan for the next time that you meet. Give students time to research the topic and then come back with their own understanding to share with the group, so that you can do this either, have them take it home as, hey, next time we meet, let's do this. Or, I know it's not very conventional, but we all have smartphones nowadays, and we are talking about adult learners who are motivated. They're not, gonna necessarily mess around on Facebook when you're asking them to, hey, why don't you look up Shunyata and see what you can find, and then we can share our understanding of that, or whatever your topic was. So you're giving students some agency over how it is they're receiving the information, and sometimes that supportive environment, that self-motivated learning, can help kick in a understanding that maybe you weren't able to provide them. Maybe sometimes it just is, and it's okay. Doesn't mean you're not great at what you do. It's just, what helps. So before I close, I did want to share an experience among the many experiences that I've had of lessons flopping. So I remember that I had a group of 7th graders who actually, I call them my star students. They were one of a kind, amazing group of students. And they really were the people who taught me how to teach. And they wanted nothing more one day than to just sit and learn numbers. Now, I had a whole lesson plan worked out. We were going to learn numbers 1 through 15. And we were going to talk about, use those numbers to help us talk about how old they were. And we were going through, and they learned their numbers to 15. We practiced them. Then we practiced how you say how old you are in French. And they were getting it, but they definitely weren't interested. And that's another kind of flop. They were not interested. I would go around the room and ask them in French, quel âge as-tu? How old are you? And they would maybe respond, maybe not respond, give me a shrug. And then I stopped and I was like, okay, what's happening, guys? Because this was a group of energetic, usually very enthusiastic group of kids. What's going on? Why are you not answering me? Can't we just learn how to count to like 1,000,000? That's all they wanted. They just wanted to learn numbers. And at first I fought back. I said, no, we have a curriculum and we have to, you need to know your numbers. Well, don't we also need to know our other numbers so that we can kind of say what year we're in? And eventually, yes, they were right. They were going to need to do that. So we had a mini back and forth. And finally I said, all right. In the end, I gave up. I let go. I said, oh, okay, let's do numbers. And if that wasn't the best lesson we ever had, I don't know. They cheered right up. They stood up in their seats. They were shouting numbers out in French. We had fun, and gosh darn it, they learned their numbers up to like 1 million. And we played games. They showed me what they know. They showed me they could do it. And then we were able to move on and talk about how old they were. But they needed to just get out of their system that need to learn all their numbers that they could. And that taught me a really important lesson in letting go of my plans, letting just things unfold the way they were meant to unfold that I didn't even realize until they told me. So it is okay to let go. I had to let go of my ego. I had to admit that, okay, the way I planned this didn't work for this group of people. And sometimes that's just something that happens. And it is okay. It's fine. It is a learning opportunity. And like I said, this is a group of students who really taught me what teaching really is. And this group of kids, for the amount of time I had them all the way through till they were seniors. All along the way, they taught me how to teach better. And it was an amazing experience to work with them because they were not afraid to voice their needs and their wants. And we worked together to navigate what those were. And it changed me as a teacher. So, when we open ourselves up to those opportunities to learn, it really, really helps us. And it's a great opportunity to grow as people who think we know all the stuff. Sometimes we don't know all the stuff. So at least not as much as we think we do. So, and that's okay. To close here, your quiz this week will ask you to make sure that you have read through the article. So again, if you haven't yet, I did refer to the article. You will want to, if you haven't read it yet, you will want to go back through and see what I was talking about and contemplate some methods that you can use to overcome flops that are mentioned in the article. If you were to come across some of those types of flops, how would you handle it? Keeping in mind that you are working with adult learners and not the young children that the article refers to. Have fun. It is an opportunity to be creative. So I hope that you find that you can come up with some cool things to do with your adult learners if you have a lesson that flops. So we will see you for week 7.